Howdy, today's distance learning to set up some other stuff in classroom is the Vietnam War and how America gets involved. The Vietnam War would be a war that would affect America for a long time, cause thousands of casualties, over 55,000 Americans would die. It would split the country and lead to a lot of unrest by the 60s and early 70s. So today we want to take a look at how do we actually get into the Vietnam War? What really gets us involved? The Vietnam War does not start with America. Vietnam is a colony of France. During World War II, when France surrenders to the Axis powers, the Vichy France set up in Vietnam and Japan comes in. Ho Chi Minh was a Vietnamese leader who did not like the French, did not like the Japanese either, and would fight both. During World War II, we did help. The OSS, which is the origins of the CIA, would send help to Vietnam to help them in their struggle against the Japanese. When the war was over, Ho Chi Minh would actually send a letter to Truman asking the United States for help. He would say things that he would include quotes from the U.S. Declaration of Independence. On the classroom assignment, there's going to be a link and you're actually going to read Ho Chi Minh's Declaration of Independence, and you'll see so much modeled there or connected to the U.S. Declaration of Independence. But you have to take a look at this in the bigger context. France is our ally. France asked for our help. We have to give it to us. And then after World War II, you have the start of the Cold War. The United States versus the USSR. Democracy versus communism. And if you fit this into that picture, we're going to back France, who's our ally and a democracy. Well, Ho Chi Minh decides to fight anyhow. And he's going to organize, and they're going to be called the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh would be those Vietnamese who do not want the French to rule them as a colony. And they're going to fight the French. There's an old saying, how does an ant kill an elephant? By biting it 10,000 times. And that's what the Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh would do. They would have all these guerrilla attacks all across the country of the French. And the French had a hard time fighting a guerrilla war. And this is going to continue, and it's going to sap the French. Eventually, they're going to send more and more resources and people in. Finally, the French decide to set a trap for Ho Chi Minh. Why not build a fort, if you look at the picture over there, called Dien Bien Phu. And it's in a valley. And what the French are going to do is try to get the Vietnamese to go ahead and attack them. And in a set-piece battle, the French could then maybe fight them face-to-face and kill them. But they underestimate the Vietnamese. Ho Chi Minh and his men surround Dien Bien Phu. They dismantle cannons, carry them over the mountaintops. They bring in hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, and they open fire. Now, the French sent a relief force. A guy by the name of Bernard Fall wrote a great book. It's called Hell in a Small Place about Dien Bien Phu. And he also wrote a book called Street of No Joy about the French trying to get to Dien Bien Phu and help them. I'm going to show you a clip on the classroom from We Were Soldiers Once and Young. It shows a depiction of what happens to the French forces trying to go up there, and they're ambushed by the Viet Minh. Eventually, the Viet Minh will surround Dien Bien Phu, attack it, and the French would surrender. France has to surrender and leave Vietnam. At this point in the 1950s, the United States and the USSR step in, and we're going to do something which, in my own personal opinion, I'm not sure why. We had just finished the Korean conflict, and the Korean conflict just started after World War II when we split a country, Korea, up, give the communists north, the south to democracies, and then the two sides are going to end up fighting a nasty war. So it worked so well in Korea. What do we do in the 1950s? Let's do it again in Vietnam. We split the country up. The north goes to Ho Chi Minh and will eventually become communist. The south goes to us, the democracy. And there's a kind of a wishy-washy plan that they're going to have an election to reunite the country, but we're not going to let that happen because the people probably would have voted for Ho Chi Minh. So what happens is Vietnam gets split up. Ho Chi Minh in the north is not going to allow the south to slip away, and the north is going to start attacking the south using guerrilla warfare, what worked against the French. So the United States is going to send help to the south to help them because of something called the domino theory. The domino theory is you have to stop the communists because they're going to keep taking country by country. You got to, hey, they took China, they took North Korea, they're going to try to take South Korea. Well, they get North Vietnam. If we're not careful, they'll get South Vietnam. Then what falls next? Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. What is it? So it's like a long series of dominoes where you knock one over, they knock all the rest over. So we're going to stop this by stopping this flow of dominoes. We're going to stop the North from taking over the South. Now, again, this fits in that whole big Cold War concept of We're not going to allow the communist countries to expand, you know? All right. Under President Kennedy, we do send forces to help South Vietnam with training, and we supply them with that. But it's not a major U.S. effort yet. After Kennedy's assassination, the movement of the war is going to shift to Vice President John F. Kennedy, to Lyndon Baines Johnson, who becomes the new president. So Johnson does not want to lose a war that Kennedy started, and so Johnson is going to keep sending American help and support. In the midst of all this, the Gulf of Tonkin incident happens. If you look at the picture, you see the destroyer. We send Navy forces to also help. Now, supposedly our Navy forces are in the Gulf of Tonkin kind of innocently, but in reality, we do know that they were probably helping South Vietnamese forces attack North Vietnamese installations. But while our destroyers are in the Gulf of Tonkin, they are attacked by North Vietnamese Peachy boats. Two destroyers, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, are attacked in the Gulf. Well, we are a major world power. We are not going to let a small little country disrespect us like that, start, pushing us around. If you look at the picture, this is Robert McNamara. He was Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and now under Johnson. And during this incident, it looks like North Vietnam is specifically attacking American forces, an American destroyer. We cannot let that go unanswered. This is the official company line. This diagram shows the boats being attacked and them shooting at us. Now, what actually happens is really tricky. There's a phrase called the fog of war, which means when the guns start, it's hard to know exactly what happens. I got to go to Brown University, and they have something called the Choices program there. Great program. And one of their programs is they got Robert McNamara and other people involved, especially people from North Vietnam, years later to look back at this incident. And in looking back at what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin, something happened. We noticed that some of the messages from the destroyers indicate we were attacked. Then later on, they go, well, we're not sure. And it's possible that the sonar operators actually mistook signals as torpedoes that weren't actually torpedoes. But it looked like they were attacking us, and that's a direct threat to the United States. So there's going to be a link on the classroom, which you're going to look, so you can, on YouTube, can look at McNamara in the fog of war talking about this, and then listen to the actual people back then talking about what happened. So we'll take a look more at that. So because of this, Johnson is going to step up the America's presence and reaction to this attack. He's not going to do it alone, and he gets Congress to authorize military force. It's called the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. And what it does is it basically allows the President of the United States to do militarily whatever he needs to do to stabilize the situation and take care of American forces that are there. And so with this, we start sending more forces in, only now instead of just advisors, we're going to be more combat forces. We're going to send in more ships, more planes. We're going to ramp up our effort. And of course, the North Vietnamese are going to respond. And this war, step by step, is going to accelerate till by 1968, 69. We've got 500,000 forces there. And we're fighting a war. It's going to lead to such things as Operation Rolling Thunder. This is the bombing campaign in North Vietnam. If you see the picture there, I used to know a guy, God rest his soul, has passed, who was a B-52 pilot. And he flew on these missions, and he said they opened up the doors and just dropped tons of bombs on North Vietnam. But it was such a weird war. There was rules. They couldn't drop bombs on the ships bringing weapons into North Vietnam or the dock where they were unloaded, but they could drop bombs on the rail lines as they left. They couldn't do this or they could do that. There was all sorts of rules of engagement. And it's going to lead to a lot of things in the war that now we kind of look back at like, but back then it made a lot of sense. If you look at the other picture, you see the plane spraying. That was called Operation Ranch Hand. Since it's a guerrilla war and the enemy, just like the French found, is in the jungles, it's hard to find, we decided to spray defoliants, especially Agent Orange, on the jungle, kill the jungle, easier to see the enemy. But then it also exposes our soldiers in those jungles to Agent Orange. And I lost a good friend of mine, Larry, God rest your soul, from Agent Orange. Years later, caused the cancer that killed him. But this war is going to accelerate. In later lessons, we're going to take a look more at the war, how it affects America. But now let's go back to that first attack. We were fighting against communists. Remember, it's a big global thing. But the actual incident that we used to ratchet up our military might have possibly been not what we thought it was. We were fighting and we were going to support South Vietnam, but the incident that we used to justify it in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution might actually have been not exactly what it seems. So go to the classroom, take a look at the link from Fog of War, and you can hear McNamara's own words on this topic.